Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 2 of Ethical, Legal, and Financial Issues in Healthcare. This week, we're going to be covering chapters 1 and 2 in Law and Ethics for Health Professions. And the first chapter of the book covers a brief introduction to law and ethics, so today we're going to start with going over some basic elements and definitions related to those two things. So why study law and ethics in healthcare? Really, it's because the world is constantly changing with new litigation and new precedents emerging, and it's what keeps us sharp, professional, and trusted in the work that we do. Emphasis on the trust in that sentence. Understanding these principles will help you to operate at the highest level, avoid the kinds of legal headaches that can end careers, and navigate the rights, responsibilities, and challenges you'll face in patient care. And ultimately, it's about more than just doing your job. It's about improving the health and well-being of patients and the society we serve. So, number one reason, it helps healthcare practitioners perform at the highest professional level possible. Second reason is that it prevents legal entanglements that can threaten careers. Third reason, it addresses rights, responsibilities, and challenges in patient care. And then the final reason, and I think potentially the most important, is that it improves patient and societal well-being. So I'll also add that keeping the public's trust in healthcare and health research are extremely important. And hearing about failures of healthcare professionals to follow the law and practice sound ethics can definitely erode trust. And if someone doesn't trust the healthcare system, they're less likely to seek the care they need or participate in health research when they're able to. So knowing how to navigate these potentially sticky situations makes you a better custodian of patients' rights and well-being of society in general. So now we'll go over some key legal terms just to make sure everyone is on the same playing field and understands. The first is plaintiff, and that is the person bringing the civil charges against somebody else. So if you accuse somebody else of doing something, then you are the plaintiff. The defendant is the person being charged or sued. Liability just means that every competent adult has a legal responsibility for their own acts. A precedent is a court decision from the past that guides future cases. And product liability is the manufacturer's responsibility for defects and harm in their products. So for example, a drug or device that goes wrong, then the manufacturer may be held responsible or liable for that defect. So let's say that a doctor is being sued by one of his patients for prescribing him the wrong medicine for her disease. And in this case, the patient would be the plaintiff and the doctor the defendant. The patient trusted the doctor to prescribe her the correct medicine, but now the doctor could be liable for acting wrongly if he actually did prescribe her the wrong medicine. And the judge in the case will use precedents from earlier cases to make a judgment about the case. So for example, what the punishment should be, if there should be a punishment, how much the punishment or how severe the punishment should be. Now, if the harm to the patient was actually because of the medicine and not the doctor incorrectly prescribing it, then that's what we call product liability, where the manufacturer is actually responsible for the harm and not the doctor, him or herself. And now let's talk about some key aspects of law and ethics. These are sort of the building blocks of law and ethics. So, and keep in mind that these can get very blurred. The lines between each one of these elements can blur quickly if you're not careful, and they do tend to have a feedback between them. So in reality, they do actually blur. So moral values are at the personal level and tend to change the least of any of these. So once a person has ingrained moral values, then they typically do not change very much over the course of a short period of time. So moral values are personal, and they're beliefs formed through the influence of family, culture, and society. Etiquette is the pretty much governs, it's the unspoken rules that govern the interaction with others. Sometimes it is spoken or taught as well. So it encompasses courtesy and manners. And ethics is more of a societal societal etiquette. So these are the principles, standards, and the guide to conduct for society in general. Bioethics is just the discipline relating to ethics that actually studies ethics in regards to biological research, and especially as applied to medicine. A protocol, which is often written, now we're getting into the actually written things, protocol and law. Protocol is usually written, and it's the rules of etiquette that's applicable specifically to one's place of employment. It can also be applicable to a project that you're on, for example. So in the world that I come from, in research ethics and the Institutional Review Board, which is an ethics committee that reviews protocols, we look at the protocol for a specific study, which typically, if it's a clinical study, the protocol is about, I would say, between 40 and 120 pages long, and it pretty much says everything that anyone on the project can or cannot do as part of that project. And then law, of course, is codified and written down. These are a set of governing rules for a society or a jurisdiction, like a country or state or a county, a city. So as you can see, some of these do intertwine and they blur pretty quickly. Don't feel bad if you do blur these in your mind. It's actually how reflecting reality. Now, what kind of qualities do successful healthcare practitioners actually need? So to be a good healthcare practitioner, you really need to have good interpersonal skills, like being able to be courteous, being able to be compassionate, and you have to have people skills. So being courteous to others and knowing how to apply etiquette properly. You need to be compassionate, which requires a degree of empathy, or the ability to place yourself in the other person's shoes and experience what they're experiencing. And then you need to be able to get along with others, including those people who may have opposing views or disagree with you. That often happens. So just being able to get along with people and maybe have back and forth about potentially a middle ground or a third way. You also need to have useful skills like common sense, which is the ability to usually quickly judge how to approach a situation or problem. And common sense is usually gained through a mix of experience, observation, and learning from your peers or societal group, where you pick up sort of unspoken rules and norms, so things like morals, etiquette, ethics, and etiquette. And second, you need to have good technical skills in whatever field you're in. I think that goes without saying. And then finally, you need to have great critical thinking skills to be able to solve challenging problems that often arise in a healthcare setting, where you'll identify and clarify the problem you're dealing with, gather the information needed about the problem, and then evaluate the evidence, consider any number of alternatives, and then choose what you consider to be the best alternative and move forward. And now we'll move on to Chapter 2, which talks about making ethical decisions and how ethical decisions actually arise and develop. So value development theories. Why are these important? Value development theories are important to making ethical decisions because they explain how people form, prioritize, and change their core beliefs over time. And so they just don't come out of nowhere. They're developed over short or long periods of time. And those beliefs are the foundation for deciding what feels right or wrong. So they show the roots of ethical thinking. Understanding how values emerge through childhood development, social influences, or moral reasoning stages helps explain why people make different choices in the same situation. They also help predict behavior, so if you know what stage or framework someone is using to reason, then you can better anticipate their ethical approach. They reveal blind spots, so recognizing how values form can help us see biases, gaps, or limits in our own ethical reasoning. They also guide growth. Theories give us a roadmap for moving forward toward more mature, consistent, and inclusive moral reasoning, and in short, value development theories can help us understand where our moral compass comes from, so we can fine-tune it along the road to make fairer, more thoughtful ethical decisions. So 3 of the theories that are focused on in the book are Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and Piaget's moral development theory, and Kohlberg's moral development theory. So in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, ethical decisions can be shaped by the level of need a person is focused on. So for example, someone struggling for safety may prioritize their own survival over abstract justice. Someone at the self-actualization level, on the other hand, may act based on broader moral ideals. Piaget's moral development theory shows how ethical judgments can shift from rules are unchangeable, sort of in the earlier stages of development, to rules now serve people in the later stages of development. And Kohlberg's moral development theory explains why someone follows rules. So for example, do they follow them out of fear, or do they follow them out of a sense of justice? And I'm not really going to go into detail on these 3 things in this presentation, since there are videos for you to watch on each of these this week below. And value choice theories are also very important for ethical choices because they explain how people prioritize competing values when making decisions. So they developed these values, so these value choice theories explain how they prioritize those values, which directly shapes moral behavior. So ethical dilemmas often involve conflicts, and so what benefits one person might harm somebody else, or what is fair might be inconvenient. These theories really help us understand decision priorities. They reveal which values, so for example, honesty, fairness, compassion, and efficiency, which of those values an individual or organization emphasizes when faced with a choice. They also bring consistency in ethics. By clarifying value hierarchies, people can really make more coherent and predictable ethical decisions rather than reacting impulsively on the spur of the moment. They also bring conflict resolution into focus. They provide frameworks for weighing competing moral considerations and then make it easier to navigate gray areas. And they also allow personal and professional growth. So understanding how values develop and are chosen actually allows individuals to reflect, refine, and align their actions with their own ethical principles. So act utilitarianism is the right action is the one that produces the greatest overall happiness or least overall harm in a specific situation. So let's say, for example, a doctor has 1 dose of a life-saving medicine and 2 patients in need, and she gives it to the patient who is most likely to survive and lead a productive life because this choice maximizes overall well-being in that specific situation. And that's an example of act utilitarianism. Rule utilitarianism is a bit different. It says that the right action is the one that follows rules, which if generally followed would produce the greatest overall happiness or least overall harm. So let's say, for example, a hospital adopts a policy that all patients are treated on a first-come, first-served basis, because consistently following that generally maximizes fairness and overall happiness, even if in a specific case it might not yield the single greatest immediate benefit. Now, duty-oriented theory, or deontological theory, this ethical framework holds that actions are either right or wrong based on moral rules or duties, regardless of the consequences. So this is not a consequence-oriented theory. What matters here is following ethical obligations and not maximizing outcomes. So let's say, for example, a nurse knows that that patient confidentiality has to be maintained. And even if sharing that a particular patient's information could potentially save that person's life, she withholds it because her duty to respect confidentiality is a moral obligation. And the final one here, the final choice theory, is virtue ethics. And in this ethical framework, it emphasizes the character and virtues of the person acting rather than rules or consequences. So right actions flow naturally from being a morally good or virtuous person. An example here would be a nurse that notices an anxious patient struggling to maintain their treatment plan, and rather than simply following hospital protocol or calculating which action maximizes efficiency, the nurse exercises patience, empathy, and compassion, virtues that she wants to cultivate as part of her professional character, by taking extra time to explain the plan clearly and reassure the patient. So the ethical action comes from her character, not from the rules or outcomes around her. And now we'll look at some very, very important principles of healthcare ethics. These are autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, justice, confidentiality, role fidelity, and veracity. And typically the first four, autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice, are called the pillars of healthcare ethics. So what is autonomy? Autonomy is simply respecting a patient's right to make their own informed decisions about their care, or even to refuse care. So an example here is that a patient chooses to refuse a particular treatment after the doctor explains the risks and benefits, and the healthcare team then honors that decision even if they disagree. Second is beneficence. So beneficence is just acting in the best interest of the patient to promote well-being and positive outcomes. So for example, a physician recommends a vaccination to protect a patient from serious illness, knowing that it will benefit their health. Non-maleficence, or do no harm, avoids actions that could cause unnecessary harm or injury to a patient. Example here is that a surgeon carefully follows sterile procedures to prevent infection during an operation. Fourth is justice, and this is just treating patients fairly and equitably as possible, distributing any healthcare resources without bias. Example here is that a hospital ensures that all patients, regardless of background or insurance status, have equal access to emergency care. Fifth is confidentiality. So this is protecting private patient information and only sharing it with authorized individuals and individuals who need it, even if they're authorized. So for an example, a nurse keeps a patient's HIV status private and only discusses it with authorized medical staff involved in their care. Role fidelity is being faithful to the responsibilities and ethical obligations of one's professional role. Example here is that a pharmacist accurately dispenses medication according to the prescription and does not perform procedures outside their scope of practice. And finally, we have veracity. And this is simply just being truthful and honest in all professional interactions. Example here is that a doctor honestly explains the prognosis of a terminal illness to a patient and their family, rather than sugarcoating facts. So that's pretty much all I had for you today. That's just an overview of chapters 1 and 2. Please read if you have not done so already. And for this week, focus on reading chapters 1 and 2. If you want to get a start on chapter 3 as well, please do that. Watch the videos in the week 1 folder below, and complete the engagement activity for this week. And as usual, I'm available whenever you need me, so just feel free to reach out via email if you would like to schedule a time to talk. Thank you.